Well, you know, the USS Monitor's success at the Battle of Hampton Roads prompts the U.S. Navy to say, wow, we want to build more monitors. Now, remember, monitors have a low freeboard. They are actually not a ocean-going vessel, and yet to serve during the Civil War, they have to be ocean-going. And so the U.S. Navy is going to take certain steps to make they have ability to blockade southern ports. Also, they are concerned about the commerce raiders, and so they want to build ships called, they're generally sloops, but they call them cruisers. And they are supposed to be very fast and able to go pick up the Alabama or the Florida or so forth. Then also, believe it or not, the U.S. Navy thought we might go to war with Great Britain at any moment. So we thought those cruisers, which are sloops of war, would actually be able to prey upon British shipping during the war. So it's like, I can't believe you're talking about all these things. And, you know, basically, the Idaho is just one tremendous example. But I have to tell you, there is a person who will be assigned to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and his job is to supervise vessels that are under construction. And that person happens to be our hero, John Worden. So John Worden, of course, he's an expert on, well, he's a scientific officer, number one. Number two, he's a very brave individual. Number three, he's the commander of the Monitor during the Great Battle. I can't tell you how he's viewed by all Americans. They actually had a raffle for a special silver sword they were going to give one admiral. And actually, Worden got 2 votes, but I have to tell you, Farragut, David Glasgow Farragut, got 139, so he got the sword. But still, to get 2 votes, I think, is marvelous. He's going to work for Francis Hoyt Gregory, and he is in charge of new ship construction. And as a result of that, he is going to interface with Worden on building all these ships and judging their success. Now, this is all going to happen at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. This is a pre-war image, but I think it's bad propaganda because they show a ruined dock at the Navy Yard, and I guess that's telling the Navy you better do something about it. Another view of, you know, the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So, basically, Gustavus Vasa Fox, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, gets enamored with ironclads, and he actually is, you know, thinks John Ericsson is the greatest genius ever afloat. And so he gets to broaden his designs of the Monitor. See, the U.S. Navy by 1863 and 64 don't know how long this war is going to last. And in their opinion, it's going to last through 1866, maybe as long as 1867. So they wanted to have specialized ships to be able to deal with the Confederate ports, Confederate navies, as well as operating up the shallow rivers in the Confederacy. And if you think about it, you know, many of these rivers like, oh gosh, the York is deep until it gets to West Point, then it splits off in the Mattaponi and Pamunkey, and they're deep, and then they get very shallow. And yet the Confederates could be up there building something and so forth, so they wanted to be able to get them. And so also they wanted to improve the seaworthiness of ships, and so now Ericsson is going to design, of course, the Monitor, the Passaic class, the Kannapolis class, and then he actually does preliminary designs on certain ships, which we'll get to, but he wants to focus on making a huge monster of a Monitor that is seaworthy, and this is his first one, the Puritan, Now, the Puritan, this is how it looks, but you know something? That's how it ends up. And I have to tell you, the Puritan is going to not be finished during the Civil War. In fact, they do not commission it until 1896, when it's been rebuilt as what's called a new Navy monitor. In fact, when they get ready to send it out of the ship house at Greenpoint, Continental Iron Works, guess what? It gets stuck in the ways and won't slide down into the water. So that's not a very good thing about a ship. And it was just huge, and it really was so expensive to build, I have to tell you, that the U.S. Navy leaves it on the stocks and will later in the 1870s, after the Virginius affair, they'll start taking some Civil War monitors and modernizing them as we call new Navy monitors. Actually, Chester Nimitz was in command of a squadron of new Navy monitors, and they were ocean going. So the Puritan is a ship that is a concept that takes the monitor to its fullest level, but it is not going to be properly used. Now, we also see this is the Spuiten Devil, Spoiten Devil, I don't know, I'm not Dutch, but it is actually originally called the Stromboli. And so they build this, and actually they were intending to make it a monitor at first. This is by William Webb Shipyard, and it turns out that, oh no, it can't float a turret. And so they go, oh, so they make it into a torpedo boat, which, is shortly after its commissioning, it will be decommissioned and then eventually broken up while it's in port, in Brooklyn Navy Yard. So I have to tell you, so we got the Puritan, that is a ship that's huge and so complex that we can't finish it during the Civil War. Our technology back then just did not match some of the concepts that are being put out by people. Now, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, G.V. Fox, is Gus to his friends, believe it or not, and he actually is going to go to Erickson and say, look, we need monitors that can go up these Confederate rivers. And so Erickson will draw out some sketches that show, oh my gosh, he calls that the ship is going to have the hull to be an iron cistern. He never really explains that, with a flat bottom. And he wanted to use twin propellers with two direct acting high pressure engines, each powering one propeller shaft. Now, the preliminary concepts are going to be turned over to a man known as Chief Engineer Alban Steimers. And Steimers, I got to tell you, he was, so there's the Stromboli. So this is one of the successful later classes of monitors that actually go to work. This is Alban Steimers. Steimers is, of course, Chief Engineer of the U.S. Navy, and so he's the one that approves certain engine concepts. His boss is a man known as Benjamin Franklin Isherwood, who's chief of the engineering department of the U.S. Navy. And you see, there's an argument in the U.S. Navy at this time, which makes some people look down upon the engineers, because Isherwood is a chief engineer, and he thinks he should attain the rank of admiral because he builds so many great engines and everything. And Rear Admiral David Dixon Porter doesn't like that, so there's an argument between these two branches that the engineers think they should be equal to a line officer, like a lieutenant, gunnery officer, so forth. However, that is not very popular with the line officers, because they say the engineers are greasy mechanics and they don't deserve to come into the wardroom, right? You can see that argument not working but so well. But anyway, here's one of them. Now this guy, Steimers, starts to work with Erickson early on. He actually interfaces with Erickson during the building of the Monitor. He's actually on the Monitor when it fights on March 9, 1862. He actually gets a concussion because he's operating the turret engine in the turret. So anyway, he thinks he's pretty smart, and actually he does not understand ship design. He understands engines, and this becomes really pretty bad because he runs afoul with Benjamin Franklin Isherwood, and his job is the Bureau of Construction Repair. And so when Erickson does these preliminary concepts, he turns them over to Steimers. And so Steimers is going to actually develop what is known as the Casco class. And this class is one of the worst ships ever built. They built 20 of them, believe it or not. And so this shows what's supposed to be a Monitor as a torpedo boat, which is the Navy's way of trying to save face. Whoopsie. And so, wait a second. So basically, the Casco class ships are known as light draft monitors. Actually, Steimers will make it so that the ships would actually be low in the water, and at the suggestion of Rear Admiral Joseph Smith of the Bureau of Docks and Yards, he wanted to put water tanks on the ship so that it could lower itself even more to the water. Now, all the alterations to Erickson's design that made the Casco difficult to construct, reduced its impregnability to shot, and poor maneuverability. Remember, it's got 2 engines with 2 screws, and the Chimo was the first of its class to reach the water. Admiral Gregory believed that it would be impossible for the ship to float. Naval constructor W.L. Hansen examined the ship before its trial run, and the Chimo had just 2 3/8 inches out of the water, believe it or not. And so it's overpowered, and yet if it tries to make a wake, guess what? And that was 2 3/8 out of the water without coal and ammunition and guns. So Hansen will judge that, well, you put all those things on it, it's going to be 3 inches under the water. The hull was built in a turtle back design, so only the top of the turtle shell, in theory, would be out of the water. And so that means, guess what? You're going to leak very badly. And because we did not have rubber and things like that to stop leaks back then, we had rubber, but not galvanized rubber. So anyway, so the Casco class is, I think it's funny when they all bet that the ship's not going to work at all. And so 5 of these ships are going to be transformed into torpedo boats. Erickson recommended that Steimers should be disciplined over the Casco fiasco. Now, Steimers has already got himself in trouble because he had criticized DuPont after the Battle of Charleston on April 7, 1863, and so he actually comes near to being court-martialed, which Worden testifies against him. And so Steimers then gets taken from being this chief engineer, big shot, into working on redoing the engines of the Wabash, engines designed by Isherwood, and Isherwood now was constantly paying attention to Steimers. So you could say that Steimers kind of lost his career, and so, Worden is going on all these ships. He's supervising their construction. He makes advices, and so he actually, when he's on I think I showed you that already, but on this ship, the Maopak, right? And Gideon Wells is the person that insisted on giving Native American names to all the U.S. Navy monitors. And some of them are tongue twisters for a person like me. So anyway, I got that one right, I know. But he actually goes on this boat, and they say, oh, it works great. It's really good. Look at the freeboard, look especially at the bow. And so, but what made the trial trip so good is that they served up a special punch for the officers to enjoy while they are cruising around the East River, New York Bay, so forth. And so that's, I think in Erickson, Worden actually writes his wife about it, and it's like, wow. So anyway, so the Casco class is a big failure, and so will be basically the Puritan, and we know is never really finished. He does look at the monodock class, and that becomes the first rebuilt or first successful ocean-going monitor during the Civil War. And then, so what's happening is the U.S. Navy's issuing all these contracts to people who really shouldn't get these contracts because they don't have, they don't have a stable background. And so they build one class called the Kalamazoo class. And this class is so bad that they use, trying to cheat, green lumber. And so the ships rot on the on their stocks and are refused to be accepted by the Navy. So the builder doesn't get paid the full amount of money. So it was a huge ripoff. So let's talk about the cruisers that are going to, I want to deal with this one first, actually. This is the USS Pensacola. Pensacola was one of those ships that will actually have a huge or major problems. And it's because when they do the contract for 5 sloops, or sloops of war as we call them, before the Civil War, they are going to, it's called the City class, and so the Hartford, the Richmond, the Brooklyn, and then there's the Pensacola. This is the second ship built at the Warrington Navy Yard, which is in Pensacola. It's now a naval air station because they didn't make very good ships there, I have to say. And the ship they did build was this one, the Pensacola. Now, the Pensacola will be late in its construction in 1859, and it is then sailed up to Washington Navy Yard to have its engines put in. Now, the big thing is when they signed this appropriation, there is one man known as Benjamin Dickerson. And Dickerson is this high-powered lawyer from New York City and a slickster, well-spoken, and he has a lot of political pull, thanks to Tammany Hall and so forth, and guess what he gets? He is not only a lawyer, but he has a hobby, and his hobby is known as steam engineering. And sadly, everyone listens to him, and the Congress, in their giving money to build these steam screw sloops, will say, and one of them has to have an engine featuring, guess whom? Dickerson. Now, Dickerson's never built a real engine before. He has nice little models and things like that. And he has, and so a lot of people don't like Isherwood. Now, Isherwood is the guy that is designing most engines in the U.S. Navy. They say his engines are too big and they weigh too much, and they go down the list why he should be replaced. Actually, Rear Admiral David Dixon Porter doesn't like Isherwood because Isherwood is really outspoken. He is a person that really has ideas, and those ideas, he's going to make sure you like them. Otherwise, he's not happy with you. So they send this ship up to the Washington Navy Yard, and it would have this engine system that was designed by not only Dickerson, but also a man known as Frederick Sickles, and it was part of an argument of having a short cutoff valve or a long cut out valve. And so it's a different operating of how you release steam into the engine, believe it or not. And so Dickerson believed in the long cutout valve, and so he said the system would be more economical. Well, I have to tell you, the Pensacola is going to have a power plant that turns 2 screws, and they are supposed to make 8 knots. However, when Dickerson gets the contract to build the engines, he says they're going to make 15 knots. So that's a big problem. And so basically, the engines are so worthless that I have to say is going to see that it serves with Farragut in the capture of New Orleans. It runs past the ports, but there's no record of its engines working more than 5 days in a row without breaking down. Okay, so that's not very good. And if you know a lot about Farragut on the river, he's going to have the Pensacola as a floating battery because you can't rely on its engines. So this is a big problem, I think, for everyone. Now, the sloop's design, the hull, was by John Lenthal, but the Dickerson engines are just so bad that they had to, and he actually, when he's building the engines, he kind of stops. He gets bored with the project, and so they have to hire another engineer, Edward Farron, a civilian engineer, to complete the engines. And so what happens to this one is that it goes up to the Brooklyn Navy Yard in '64 by sail, no mention of the engines working. And so basically it will have the old engines taken out. Now, I just want to tell you, the price for the engine that went into the Pensacola is going to be $350,000. One of this ship's sister ships, the Richmond, the entire ship cost $325,000. So you can see Dickerson is really duped a lot of people. So they'll have that engine taken out, and a new engine designed by, who do we love? Benjamin Isherwood. And so the new engine is going to be a 2-cylinder horizontal back acting engine with 2 boilers and driving 1 screw, able to make 11 knots. So that's, you can see the improvement that the Navy has done. Now, I think the real ship we want to talk about, is this one. And this is the Idaho. And the Idaho is going to be a big deal because, once again, it's going to be designed to chase down, as I said before, Confederate commerce raiders, actually also to prey upon British shipping, because they knew, this is how archaic the U.S. Navy is thinking. They want more monitors, even though they overpower all Confederate ironclads because of the ordnance on the monitors versus the construction of casemates. So they're able to break casemates. So you really only needed to build about 30 or so monitors, but they build a whole lot more. The Union will actually build 63 ironclads during the war, and so and that's what they use for until the 1880s, when they start to have the new Navy. So basically, this ship is supposed to, it gets Dickerson engines, and the engines that put in, when, you have to see that he will, actually Worden will make comments about this engine because basically he takes command of the ship. And actually, Gideon Wells says that before the ship is launched, is that it's likely to prove a failure. Why? Because of its engines. Its engines are supposed to make 15 knots, and they only make 8.27 knots. And as a result of that, they are extremely underpowered. And once again, like all Dickerson engines, you can't run it 5 consecutive days without it what? Breaking down. So a faulty concept indeed. Now, so, one thing about Dickerson is he's had 2 failures with engines up to the Idaho, and yet he still persists to use his political influence to get another contract. They actually have to bring in another engineer to finish that ship because he just walks off the job. And now just remember, the U.S. Navy this ship is wooden, right? It's a sailing ship. And one of the problems we have during the era of the Civil War is combining motive power. So we're adding sails and with steam power. Now, the idea at first is that, oh, great, we're going to be able to cruise with our sails, and then when we have to go into battle or so forth, maneuver somewhere, we get to turn on our engines, and if we use engines and sails, we'll go real fast. Well, it didn't work that way because most of the hulls were like the Merrimac's hull, the original steam screw frigate, was too sheer, and that means it, even though it has engines, it rolled excessively, because the designers this is a new world of ships. And that new world of ships is starting to cause complexities, and the Idaho is the greatest example. It is criminal that the Congress gave Dickerson the contract for these engines. Those engines weigh 57 tons versus a regular Isherwood engine weighing over about 34 tons. So you can see, and they're huge because they're long cutoff valve, and so they take up much of the hull. In fact, you have a problem having coal bunkers. You have a problem where the crew are going to stay. So the whole design of this ship or the engine system is faulty. But one good thing is about this ship, and that is who designed it. And the man that designed it is Henry Steers. And Henry Steers is the son of the very person, George Steers, who designed the yacht America that won the first America's Cup. In fact, while you're in the museum, you can actually see the half model that was built by or prepared by Henry's father to build the ship. And so basically, Henry will build pilot boats that are very fast, yachts and so forth, but he gets a contract to build the hull of the Idaho. Now, so he's used to having these slick hulls, and so he builds a clipper ship hull that is then fitted with the crazy engines from B.N. Dickerson. And I just got to tell you, there is no picture of Dickerson that I could find, and so either he's not loved or something, I don't know. I guess in U.S. Navy circles he would not be. So when Worden takes the ship out for testing it, he decides that the engines are so faulty that they should be removed. And basically, all the concepts of Dickerson are proven to be false, and nevertheless, they forced the U.S. Navy to accept the ship, even though they knew it was a failure from the beginning. So what's going to happen is that the engine, when it's accepted by the U.S. Navy, they said, well, we don't want it, and Congress says, you've got to have it, because once it's accepted, guess who gets paid a lot of money? Dickerson and Henry Steers. However, I'm going to have to tell you, the this is what the board says, word is on this board, that the engines should be removed because they occupied so much of the space in the vessel which should have been for other purposes. In other words, the engines are weighing the ship down. And so they take out the engines, right? And this is the Idaho as a storeship. Now, I think you all know the stories of those great clipper ships. This is the fastest of them all. This ship rated at making 18 knots. It traveled 300 miles in a 24-hour period. And you just think of that. Some say that it could make up to 20 knots, but they never try it. And so it's a fast supply ship is what happens to it. Now this is after the U.S. Navy has spent $600,000. Okay, just telling you that the Navy, in these giving of contracts near the end of the war, they're so interested in just having more ships that not all the ships become successful. They have to cancel an entire class of these cruisers known as the Chattanooga class. And so basically the Idaho is going to serve the U.S. Navy very, very well, but now it's going to be in the Asiatic Fleet. It's going to be a storeship. It's getting ready to come back to the United States, get some more supplies and so forth, when it runs into a typhoon off of Yokohama, and the ship is battered, demasked, everything, but it stays afloat. Why? Because of that Henry Steer design. And so they get it back to Yokohama, where it will be sold for scrap. And so that's the curious case of the Idaho. Idaho is a long line of problems that the U.S. Navy self-inflicts upon itself. In other words, they self-inflict bad designs, ship designs, hull designs, I should say. They accept bad engine systems that provide too much power. You know, basically what Dickerson was doing is not only did he have this long cutoff valve, but he also had to have 6 boilers so that he wanted to feed more steam into the engine so it would go faster, but it doesn't work that way. And so it dissipates too much power. Coal, 1.7 tons of coal per hour for the Idaho's engine. What does that tell you? A bad design, especially when you didn't have enough room to carry but so much coal on the ship. So after a 5-day cruise, that's why they condemn it and turn it into a sailing ship, which made it somewhat successful. So that's the story of the Idaho. I'm sorry I had to go back and discuss all these other things, but I want to let you know why the U.S. Navy is building these ships and how they're being duped by unscrupulous people with bad designs and so forth. So, any questions?
Here's a question.
I got one. As far as I know, at that time in Civil War, there was no Idaho State. So how did this ship get that name?
It's the only one of its class, and so I don't know exactly. I mean, they already know Idaho. There's a river named Idaho, so that's the only connection I could see.
It sounds like Steers should stick to yacht design.
Well, he did. That's the only warship he's going to build for the U.S. Navy.
I do encourage you, if you haven't been into our gallery, Speed and Innovation, since we put in a new exhibit wall about the half model that Steers designed, it's really fascinating and certainly a better story of his talent as a designer than...
That's his dad.
Oh, never mind. It's the Steers. But go see
goes
it
with the
anyway.
blood.
It's good.
Let's
It's
see.
good. It's a nice exhibit. Another question from in the room. How about you, Christy? Any online?
Yes, I have a couple of questions.
Okay, great.
First, I'll start off with a comment from Mr. Peter, and I apologize in advance if I mispronounce this, is Kolakowski. His comment is, John, your presentation of the U.S. Navy culture, personalities, ship cost overruns, and constructing quote-unquote bad ship classes has exhibits in today's Navy. To use the phrase, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
There you go.
And
And that's very, and I know, Chris, thank
Yeah,
you for that
thank
comment,
you.
Chris. And yes, it's very, very true. And even, just think, the Monitor is a bad design. It's a bad gun platform. It sinks, right? And it can't go to sea under its own power. So it's underpowered because Erickson insists on using his own engine, which can only produce so much power, and instead of using an Isherwood engine that could produce more power. In other words, his engines could make on a typical wooden ship about 10 to 12 knots. And so, so the Monitor is I love the Monitor. I've written about it extensively. However, I have to caution anyone who wants to build a new warship for the U.S. Navy that think about seaworthiness as one of the big things in the back of your mind. So thank you, Chris.
yeah. And Dr. Betts asks, did all of the steam piston engines have a common point of failure? Bad connecting rods, poor seals, metal seizing, etc.
They actually, remember, we were in the steam engine really is on board a ship is going to be like the Claremont 1807. They use paddle wheels. 1839, they invent the screw propeller. So that means the power is going to the screw that has to be turned. And so basically, they're not always understanding exactly how these engines are working, because you're building new styles of ships that also have sails, so you have to have a hull that has qualities to put up your sails, but that dissipates how that engine is going to move the ship in the water. And so I think the Merrimack is a fine example of a bad engine and in fact, it's condemned before the Civil War, and yet the Confederates have nothing better to do than reuse it. So that tells you how bad off they were. But U.S. Navy has all these resources, all this money, and so they keep experimenting. And Isherwood is one of the most experimental people related to the U.S. Navy. And so he's trying to make different changes. So Dr. Betts, you're quite correct, Larry, that it's like the Merrimack the engine produced over 500 horsepower. However, when it got to the propeller, it was 247 horsepower. Where did those 300 horsepowers go? And so you got to realize that part of it went into the engine itself operating, but more importantly, it's the transmission or how we're turning that screw and trying to take the power and putting it into the I can't remember that word. Drive shaft. There we go.
Came to you, good.
Somehow.
Another
John.
online question?
Yes, one more. Mr. Ray Barrows asked, how long was Warden blinded by the injury he sustained while the Monitor battled the Virginia? And did he have any long-time disability caused by this injury?
Yes. He is going to be on leave from March 9 or March 10 all the way until around November 1st. And the big thing is how they treat it. You looked at Worden actually close up. It's like he had powder stains on his cheeks and near his eyes. He never recovers full use of his left eye. In fact, during the battle of, the sinking of the Nashville, or the Rattlesnake, that he credits his paymaster for helping him see, because he said, my eyesight is very poor. And so, but he stays in the Navy. So basically, when he gets those powder flakes and pieces of shrapnel, they have to pick them all out of his eye. And yes, I hope you're not having lunch, and so that was the real treatment. And he goes to Washington from Hampton Roads because Daniel Long, the surgeon for the Monitor, says, I can't do this, I'm not trained, so they have to take him to a specialist. And he stays at home of his very good friend, Henry Augustus Wise. And actually, one of my favorite stories is while he's at Wise's house recovering, Abraham Lincoln goes and visits him. And Worden says, what an honor it is. I'm sorry I cannot see you. And he kind of puts out his hand to shake his hand. And Lincoln says, no, you are the greatest hero of the nation, and I laud you, and I hope you regain your eyesight, something like that. And so it was pretty amazing, because Worden elevated himself. He was a scientific officer, which means he worked under Commander Matthew Fontaine Maury to learn about currents and observations. So you got to shoot the stars to understand how to take your ship. And so it's really, he's a brilliant officer, and he is the first secret agent of the Civil War, believe it or not. When Florida leaves the Union, there's a big Confederate forts there and a shipyard, and one of the forts is held by the Union, and actually Worden goes on a mission, right, to get the U.S. Navy to help defend Fort Pickens, which is on Santa Rosa Island. And so, the great thing is he does that, and he's wearing his Union uniform, by the way. And so he's getting ready. The war has started, because the war almost started in Pensacola. I'm going to tell that story sometime this year. And so Worden actually is wearing his uniform. I'm going to go on the train. Everyone says, no, don't do that. But he did, and actually Braxton Bragg has him arrested, and he spends several months in a prison cell in Montgomery, Alabama, because at the beginning of the Civil War, what do we do with these POWs? And that became a very important thing. So he gets exchanged eventually, and that's what puts him in New York in time to take command of the Monitor. And I want to be, as he said, the agent for the Monitor, or this ship's Erickson battery's success. So it's pretty powerful. Anyway, what else would you like to know?
You said?
I think I have one more. Mr. Michael Werner comments, but also asks, engine design, especially with high pressure boilers,
Yes.
was still in early evolution of design. The loss of high pressure of Idaho's engines must have produced high heat.
What?
Did the loss of high pressure of Idaho's engines produce high heat?
Oh, yes.
Horsepower, high heat, horsepower, okay.
You don't realize that in the Monitor, just as an example, the engine temperature, engine room temperature gets up to 130 degrees. So you can only serve on those conditions. They rotate coal heavers, firemen, and engineers in and out, because with an Erickson horizontal side lever engine, you have to continually oil the engine to keep it operating. Same thing with the Merrimack's engine. So that was one of these faults. They had no self-lubricating system. And so that high heat, because of the dissipation of the power, that horsepower, has steam power to it. And that steam power then is released somewhere, and the only place it can be released is in the engine room. So yes, he's very correct in that.
Is that why the Oakham melted? That Oakham stuff that they attached around the turret and things like that?
No, that didn't melt. that got washed away.
Washed, okay.
Yeah. So, so they really don't have, you think of engines back then, in fact, you can come and sometimes we have rebuilt a Worthington steam pump. And when you see it operate, there tain't any rubber or other types of things to help capture all that power instead of letting it be dissipated. Once it's dissipated, that is dissipated into the room where the engine is. So that's my best
Why
answer.
did Gideon Wells want to name those monitors after Native Americans? Was there a push for that, or
I don't think there was a push
campaign?
for that. He just he made that decision,
Okay.
and so, and you know, some of them are like, you know, Powhatan. I can do that one,
Right.
but
Yeah,
some of them
about 10 syllables long.
Yes, that's
We know-
right.
Yeah.
And so I don't. I'm trying to think. In his, he has a 2-volume diary that has been published, of course, and I have. So if I was home, I could look it up.
That's curious.
I don't know precisely why. He just does so because it's all about the nation, you know, preserving the nation. And who are the original people of America? Well, it just so happens they are Native Americans.
But you're not.
But I'm not.
Right. That's just
I've been
clarifying your
scalped,
picture.
you know, so.
Drew, you have a question. Good. Hold a second.
Earlier, you were talking about sloops of war.
Yes.
I just looked up, was it Lancaster, USS Lancaster?
Oh,
Was
it
that
was the
part of
same
that group?
class as
Oh, the
the
Eagle.
Yeah.
Pensacola. Yes.
So that's our Eagle out in the lobby we're talking
that's right.
there.
Yeah, because I looked for a long time, I thought that was a frigate,
It's not.
but then I read it, and it's a sloop of war.
Right. And so it is only armed with 29-inch Dahlgrens in broadside. However, generally they had 2 pivot guns, and they would be like 60-pounder rifle up to 100-pounder rifles. They'd also have larger shell guns, so that those pivot guns are key to their operation as a warship during the Civil War. And so all the ship guns are numbered, and you could see, like, why does Franklin Buchanan want to sink the Cumberland first? It has a pivot gun, a 60-pounder, well, 70, they say a 70-pounder rifle, but the U.S. Navy didn't use them. They used 60-pounders, but it doesn't matter. He thought that gun would be the only gun that could break through his casemate. So the pivot gun was very, very, it in essence, modernized. You see, these steam screw sloops were archaic almost as soon as they were built, okay? And so, but it elongated the usage of those ships. The Pensacola, believe it or not, will remain on the Navy list as a receiving ship until 1911 at Mare Island Navy Yard, when then they say, well, you know, it's kind of dry rot or rotted, and so they move it out to a point and they burn it, you know, and
1911.
1911.
Wow.
Hey,
You came up with a great title for a future program, whether you know it or not, the Casco Fiasco.
a Casco fiasco.
When you said that, I thought title. Title of lecture to come.
Yeah, when he got reassigned, that was kind of the end of Steimer's career. The end of Steimer's career actually is because of his false statements about Samuel Francis DuPont during the April 7, 1863 Battle of the Charleston Forts.
But you can read a blog that John wrote
I
about
wrote that, didn't I?
Yes, you did. Well, thank you, John, as
Thank you.
always, and thank you all. And do fill out our survey when you get the email link to do so, right, Christy? All right, terrific. And thank you all for coming, and thank my team back there for your help.
Thank you all. Great huzzah.